All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Marisa. I'm Rob Podlasek. I'm the training director for Literacy Minnesota, and I will be your MC and chief slide flipper today. And I'm joined by the big brains, Chrysti Nielsen, who is with Northwest Service Cooperative, located out of East Grand Forks, Chrysti is, and then Theresa Fisher, who is a teacher out of West ABE. So they will be doing the bulk of the presentation and sharing their expertise. So today's session is ideas for instructing students with low-level literacy skills. And you may have noticed that in Minnesota, we have a lot of professional development. And that is especially true. You probably noticed that if you are coming from outside of Minnesota, we are blessed with a lot of PD. And we're always looking for, are there any gaps? Are there any learners that we're not serving? Are there any teachers that we're not providing the appropriate PD for? And one of the topics that frequently comes up is working with low-level literacy skills, especially native English speakers working on low-level literacy skills, especially American-born low-level literacy low-level native English speakers working on low-level literacy skills. So this training is a way to provide professional development for those instructors. And obviously we provide a lot of PD, reading PD out there. There's all the STAR stuff that's been around for many years. We know that there's a lot of reading instruction going on in English language classrooms, but this is really going to focus on those learners for whom literacy is their primary language need, and they're at that lower level. So our agenda for today, this is the welcome and overview. We're going to do a quick warm up and a needs assessment, give you a chance to share with us and the Latte Committee and the state what your PD needs are around low-level literacy instruction. We'll share a couple case studies from Theresa and Chrysti's programs, how they are serving that population. We'll spend a chunk of time talking about diagnostic assessment and the intake process that people have. And then the second half of the training, we'll look at instructional tools and strategies, really focusing on those foundational skills and really focusing on alphabetics. We encourage you to share out comments in the chat box, and we will try to answer them as much as possible. All right, so we're going to start out with a warm-up activity, and if we were all in person in a conference center somewhere, you'd already be doing this warm-up activity. Who are you? Where are you from? Who are your students? What about this crazy Minnesota weather? And then getting into that, how are you serving students with low literacy levels? And so we're going to do some breakout rooms, and we'll put you in breakout rooms of 4 or 5 people and give you a chance to introduce yourselves as you would if you were in person. And then we will have you answer a couple specific questions. And one is, what are the instructional challenges you face when trying to serve learners with low literacy levels? And we know that there are some programmatic things and some policy things, and those conversations are going on at the state level. But we really want to focus today and get you to think about those instructional challenges. And then the second thing is what professional development would help you overcome those challenges? So what could we provide at future events that would help you solve those issues? And we will look through that stuff and perhaps offer training, hopefully offer training at future events. I'm going to share out a Google Doc that everybody can add their information to. And it will look like this. So once you're in your room, you'll find a box with your room number, and then find somebody in the group who's willing to type, and you can go ahead and type in your comments. And please try to be as specific as possible, saying reading training would be helpful. That's not as helpful as saying, you know, instruction on phonemic awareness would be really, really helpful. Okay, so I am going to have Marisa put us into breakout rooms. We'll have 10 minutes and then a 2-minute countdown, so 12 minutes total, and then we'll all come back together.
All right, I should have everybody all set. So you will not have to click on anything to join the breakout room. You'll just be put there automatically. And as Rob said, we'll have, when you get that 2-minute countdown, that does not mean that you have to come out of the breakout room. It's just letting you know that you've got 2 minutes to wrap up your conversation. So just doing a little last minute shifting here so that we have enough people in each room. And here we go.
Right. As Rob said, I'm Chrysti Nielsen. I'm up in the northwest corner of Minnesota, up in East Grand Forks. I would just like to thank everybody for taking the time to share your challenges and the PD needs you need. This will definitely help us as we look at more PD around this topic. Rob, you can go to the next slide. So we're going to be looking at what we do up here in East Grand Forks. This past summer, we took some time to redesign our reading classes because we realized that we had some gaps in our instruction. Even though we were serving low-level learners or the low-level ABE readers, we didn't have a good class fit for them. So we used the NRS level descriptors chart that you will see on the right there to redesign our reading classes. So right now our classes are from 9 to 10:30. We have a CCRS levels A and B class. So if you look on the chart, that correlates to ESL levels 3 and 4 and ABE levels 1 and 2. From 10:30 to 12, we have our CCRS level A class, which correlates to ESL 1 and 2 and beginning literacy ABE. And then from 2:30 to 3:30, we have our CCRS levels C, D, and E class, which corresponds with ESL 5 and 6 and ABE 3, 4, 5, 6. Now you may be looking at that and thinking, whoa, that's a lot of levels together. But once we started looking at our students, we realized that we did not have enough students to justify having standalone classes for those levels. So we just combined them all to one, especially right now when we only have one teacher teaching our classes. You can go to the next slide, Rob. So we're just going to take a quick moment to look at what our class composition is. So in CCRS level A, we have just a little bit more ESL level 2s than we have ESL 1s. You can go to the next slide. This shows you where our students, their home countries and their first language. And as you can see, Somalia is our largest population. We have mostly Somali students, especially with our ESL. Next slide. Going on to our AB class, it is evenly split between ESL 3 and 4. So just like happy coincidence that it happened that way. You can go to the next slide. The home countries, you'll see we have more home countries and first languages in our level AB. However, again, it's still Somali population. You can go ahead. Now, our CCRS level C, D, and E. This is where it gets a little more complicated because, again, I said we didn't have enough students to just separate these out. So you'll see we have a lot of ESL 6s. That's our largest population in this class. And a good chunk of those ESL 6s are very close to completing ESL and will then be moved over to ABE status. You can go ahead and go to the next one. And our home countries and first languages for our CCRS CDE class. We have 14 home countries represented in that class. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 first languages. You can see home countries. We actually have a tie between Somalia and the United States. And for languages, Somali is just a little bit higher than English. So as you can see, that's a very diverse class. You can go to the next slide. Now, many of you are probably questioning, like, how do you guys make this work? How do we have all of these people together? What are you guys doing? And there's definitely advantages and disadvantages to this, but we feel like the advantages definitely outweigh the disadvantages. We see great collaboration between our native English and our ESL students. They talk, they help each other out, they take time to explain stuff. It's great collaboration. We have worked very hard to make our ABE site and space safe and supportive for students of all cultures. And this did not happen overnight. I mean, we took time. We've taken years to create this environment where it is just safe for everyone. And because of that, we have these amazing cultural conversations. It's great. I have learned so much by teaching different cultures, and my children have learned, and our students learn from each other. There was this one time where we had an American-born student, and she came up to me and she goes, "Why do they wear those on their head? Why do they do that?" Referring to what are some of our Somali ladies. And I said, "Oh, ask her. Oh, ask them." And she was like, "Oh no, I can't do that. I don't want to offend them. I don't want to embarrass them or offend them. No, I can't ask them." I said, "Yes, you can. Go ask them." "Oh, I can't do it." I said, "You know what? As long as you are respectful, you can ask. They are more than willing to explain to you." And so she did. She went over there and she talked to them, and they had the best conversation. And they were asking her questions about things that they didn't understand. She was asking them more questions. And it was just this amazing collaboration between cultures. And that is something that you wouldn't necessarily have if you kept those populations separate. But of course, there are some disadvantages. The native English students can sometimes pick up on lessons quicker. However, they are really good at helping our ESL students. So again, we get that collaboration. There are times when the ESL students have a harder time figuring out unknown words just because they don't understand the context. They don't understand some of the nuances. They just don't have some of that background knowledge that our native English speakers do. And one of the other disadvantages is navigating a classroom that has distinctly different goals. A lot of our, American-born native English speaking students, their goal is to get a GED or adult diploma, where our ESL learners are really working on that language acquisition. So that can kind of be tricky to navigate, but our teacher does a wonderful job with it. Next slide. Teresa, you can take it over.
Thanks. I want to put my data in those beautiful circles. That really brings it to life. That's nice. I'll have to talk to you about that later, Chrysti. So I am Theresa Fisher. I work with West Adult Basic Education. You can see our map to the right here. I'm right in the center. I work in Buffalo. And our consortium is mostly rural school districts with the exception of Plymouth Wayzata. And they're in more of a metro area. Most of us are in more of a rural area. So our numbers are smaller. We do a lot of one-room schoolhouse. Everybody's always in a mixed ability classroom. Myself, I'll talk a little bit about myself here as far as West ABE. In my site in Buffalo, I have 2 open study labs. So that's typically a mixture of people at an intermediate level and then ones who are kind of secondary and ready for GED, and they're mixed together. And then I have a reading group, 2 reading groups actually. I have an intermediate level reading group who is made up of lots of ESL students who are transitioning. And so they're at that intermediate level as they're building their English skills and they're ready to transition. And then I have one lady in the group who's at the same reading level, but she has learning disabilities. And she's been with adult basic education for a very long time. She started with the Learning Disabilities Association back when Marn Frank worked there. So Marn was her tutor like 20 years ago. So she's really come a long way to be at the intermediate reading level. And then I have a lower level reading class, and it's more like one-on-one tutoring. There's just a couple of students in that class. And then I have a family learning group, who is right now, it's usually moms working on literacy for their whole family and then their own learning goals. And that's always a mixed group, of my most diverse group as far as goals and backgrounds. And the ladies right now are mostly language learners at every level, from pre-English literate, lots of education in her home country of Honduras. So there's like 6 English learners in that group right now, and 1 native born student working on her GED, and she has a learning disability. In the past, that group's been made up of mostly native born GED gold people. Words are flowing so well. And then just a couple of ESLs. So that family learning group changes every year. So I really have to be differentiating a lot and have a lot of different goals in mind, and do a lot of assessment to figure out, well, where are they at and who can I group together in this diverse community? And then kind of moving my gaze more towards our topic here and trying to think, Rob really had to keep us on track, especially me, with what is our focus with that low literacy with English, native English speakers in mind, because I do work with such mixed groups all of the time in this one room schoolhouse setting that I would separate it for a moment, and then it would just start, as I thought about this presentation, it would meld back together again, because I use kind of, my thinking is kind of a universal planning. So I use kind of the same thought process when I think about my students, no matter if they're English speakers or non-English speakers. So when I hone back in on low literacy English speakers, native English speakers that have come through my doors, the ones that occupy my time and my thoughts the most are my native born, US born citizens who have learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities. Because they're right there and they stick, they want to learn, so they're always here. And then I thought, I was kind of going through my files this week, kind of bringing back to mind some of my folks who were foreign born, but in countries who had English as their first language, or at least their official language. Lots of other languages spoken in their countries, but English was the official language. And the 2 that came to mind the most are the ones from Belize and Guyana that were fairly recent. And they don't have disabilities, but when they came in and do their general testing, those general assessments, when I see that they're below like an 8th grade level in their general reading score, then I have to question, well, why? And I do with the others as well, and start digging at, well, why are they at the level they are? And how do I help them move forward? With those native born with the intellectual disabilities, of course, those are kind of hidden disabilities. People can't see that. They don't look at my students and say, oh, you have a challenge. It doesn't become apparent until they're reading with me. What else do I want to say here? This is kind of, you can go back for just one more second. Yeah, I know you want to move me on, right, Rob? So it kind of in my, what do these two groups have in common in my mind is, and this isn't totally research, but kind of putting it together with a little bit of research that I know, is that vocabulary is huge for those folks at that intermediate level. And those foreign born folks, almost 100% of our ABE students could benefit from explicit vocabulary instruction for one reason or the other, and I'll probably come back to that. Go ahead, Rob. Thank you for trying to get me to move ahead. So these are my two guys that are in my lowest group. So they are in ABE 1. Jim is on the left there, and he's been with me or a volunteer that I've had working with him since 2013. So back then, his general reading score on that old tape, the 910, put him at ABE 1. And Dave is on the left, and he's always been at ABE 2. He came in like 2016. And so here's that policy thing that Rob mentioned briefly that we don't want to get into the weeds with, but folks with learning disabilities, you won't necessarily see the growth that they have on those standardized test scores. So, and that's what keeps them qualified to be in our classes, showing growth. So I would like to put a word into the gods that we need to also, for people with learning disabilities, to use other assessments to mark their growth because they're small and they don't show up on those assessments. Jim saw that 910 enough times over from 2013 to 2016 that he did get to ABE 2 briefly, and then I switched to the CASAS goals in 2019 and back down to ABE 1. So that familiarity was helping. So that gives me a little idea that repetition and reading over and over again does build that reading comprehension. So it's important. So I'd like to see a revision of those policy standards. Go ahead, Rob. This is me meeting via Zoom. My STAR reading class meets via Zoom. We have done that since the pandemic broke out. And this is my gal, Kathy, with learning disabilities. And as I mentioned before, growth on those standardized tests, or growth as shown on standardized tests, has been really slow. And occasionally she's gotten discouraged, like, am I really, when there's no change in that score, in that TABE score, now in the CASAS goals score, she gets discouraged sometimes. And then I give her a reading test where she's doing the word reading. And then I can show her, look, you've gone up 2 grade levels in your ability to read words. And how do you feel when we're reading stories? Are you understanding more? And so her own anecdotal evidence tells her, yes, I am learning. I am doing better and reading more and understanding more. Go ahead, Rob. And I don't want to get too much like I'm a STAR reading trainer, but I am. So I always, it just, this graphic really helps me think about the connection and the interrelatedness of there's only 4 on this page. We're not showing phonemic awareness, but that's a huge beginning block, but these all work together. So we have the print skills of alphabetics, and that's at the word level, just one word at a time. And then print skills with fluency, can you get those words off, but in a context? And then the meaning skills, vocabulary, and comprehension. And so we might have students that come in, this is like trying to crunch a month's worth of training into 30 seconds here, but these all work together, and our students might come in like that first slide, thinking about the people with learning disabilities or the people at the intermediate level. All that group at the intermediate level might say, oh, they have a grade equivalent reading score of 6, but for different reasons. So maybe Kathy's at a 6, but it's because of her learning disability that getting the word off the page, that alphabetics is holding her back. She might know more words, but because she's having trouble getting the words off the page efficiently, that's going to keep her from, all of her brain power is going to go towards getting those words off the page, so she can't be thinking about comprehension. Other folks at that same grade level 6 might need its vocabulary. And I do want to plant this seed that vocabulary has the highest correlation with comprehension and alphabetic skills. So if people have oral vocabulary knowledge, they're going to be more likely to get a difficult word off the page. They know it, but they maybe have never seen it. They're going to be more likely to get it off the page. So if we can build the skills of the foreign-born English folks, build their vocabulary, it should translate to the alphabetics ability as well, and their comprehension. Enough of that. If you want more, go through STAR. Go ahead, Rob. Chrysti was going to talk about the intake process.
Okay, so up here, I am in charge of doing all of our intakes. I register our new students. I give them all the assessments. I do all of that stuff. So when I start the intake process and I'm looking at assessing their reading, I have a conversation with our students, or potential students, new students, whatever you want to call them. So I had this conversation, and I put on the slide just some of the questions I asked. This isn't like a bullet point list. It doesn't always go in this order. It's just a general feel. So I'll say things. I like to start off with open-ended. Like, tell me about your experience with reading, and listen to what they say. I hate reading. I love reading. I only read the newspaper. Do memes count? You get a wide range of answers for that. But just leaving that open-ended lets the student tell you all sorts of stuff, and whatever they're comfortable sharing, and you kind of get a feel for it, right? Then I ask, can I ask if you enjoy reading? Why or why not? Do you struggle with reading? And then if they say that yes, they do, I always follow it up with, is the problem the reading process itself? Excuse me. Or is it comprehending what you read? Because those are two very different things, right? And we'll have two very different interventions and strategies for teaching those things. Sometimes it's reading process, sometimes it's comprehension, sometimes it's both. I will ask, did you ever have an IEP in school? If they say yes, do you remember what it was for? What kind of accommodations did you have? Again, just to get as much information from that student as possible. And then I always ask, have you ever been diagnosed with a learning disability? Or have you ever thought you might have a learning disability? I have a 13-year-old son who is severely dyslexic. And so these low-level English, native-born English readers hold a really special place in my heart because I think of my son. And so I always have this conversation with them, and then I share with them, and my son is okay. We've had this conversation. He's okay that I share. But then I tell them, like, yeah, I have a dyslexic son, and just bringing them that information that really reassures a lot of these students. Yeah, she gets it. She understands my struggle. She sees what I'm going through. She's had some strategies. She deals with her kid. That is so, like, you can see how important that connection is to these students. So again, it's just this conversation. And there's probably some other things I ask. It just depends. Like I said, this is not a bulleted list, but just kind of wanted to give you an idea of some of the questions I use to get that reading information while I'm doing an intake. Next slide, Rob.
I'm coming. So now you know the answer, and you knew this already. Although the three of us are facilitating this discussion and throwing out what we do, we know it's only a drop in the bucket to what you all are doing, and we have a lot of shared expertise here. So the only reason we're here is because somebody asked us. I know there's a number of participants here that you could be on here with us sharing your expertise. So do so in the chat, and we appreciate that. So why do diagnostic testing? To find those strengths and those needs, and to confirm our observations and the other data that we're gathering. And it's all to help us make those instructional choices. I don't want to put everybody in a phonics group if they don't need it. I can't assume that they all need phonics. So how do I find that? And then diagnostic testing to watch their growth, see their growth, and share that with the learners. They like to see that they're learning and growing. Go ahead, Rob. I think all of our brains like graphic organizers. So this one, Henry's, that's Marcia Henry, and she has written the book Unlocking Literacy, Effective Decoding and Spelling, as you can see. This is kind of the beginning stages, phonological awareness, knowing the sounds and sound patterns. That's the beginning stages. And then it's a very predictable set of stages that learners go through. It applies to children, and it also applies to adult learners. It might be slower for adult learners. They might need, I was just in a class, I took an online class last week, and they're talking about the number of people, children, who would benefit from direct instruction, because I think it's like 50% of students get stuff without explicit instructions, but that leaves another half that really would move forward more efficiently if they had explicit instruction in these phonics skills. The next stage is connecting the alphabet letters to the sounds that they know. And then the Anglo-Saxon consonants and vowels. So her book, and Marn has taken her book and put it in a very digestible, practitioner friendly, ready to rock and roll, and it's on Atlas. But Marn summarizes that Anglo-Saxon, our language is built upon most of those one-syllable words, and it's very predictable. The challenge comes then when the next language is stacked on top of it, the Latin and Greek languages. Then we start getting into these prefixes and suffixes and affixes, and then the patterns change. So we have to explicitly guide our students to make that transition, because they're trying to apply rules, and often the learners get so far, they've got the short vowel sounds and the long vowel sounds, and then suddenly there's longer words and the same patterns don't apply. So we have to help them bridge that to that next stage and seeing those syllables and breaking, and then learning what those roots mean and going further. So go ahead, Rob. So I will promise I'll just buzz through this assessment stuff as fast as I can, and I won't always give every bit. You can come back to this. You have access to the slides, and you have access to Atlas training and EBRI training, and so you can do this in a more user-friendly way where you can take your time learning it. Basically, if a student comes in and they're like at an 8th grade, not to ignore the upper levels because they probably need some explicit instruction and vocabulary as well. But however, if they're 8th grade and below, you have to wonder, why didn't they progress? That generalized reading scores at a spot, it seems like that they've stagnated. How can I dig deeper? So you start with that standardized reading score, and then you want to give them a word reading test, and you start below where they were at. So you're starting nice and easy, and I'm not going to read through all of these, the process, but you're seeing what level of word they can get off the page. Go ahead, Rob. So on the left, there's the very first list of words. You can see they're all one syllable. Some have different vowel patterns, but mostly short and long vowel patterns. So these tests are available on the Atlas website, and you can use them. And they've been formatted in different ways. I've used them I had a brand new student during the pandemic, and I couldn't give her the test. We weren't set up to give any kind of assessments at that time, but I'm like, oh, I could have her read some words. So they're in a format that I could pull up on my Zoom screen like we're doing right now. And I did it at one word at a time. So there's different options. You can have 5 at a time. And I pulled up one word at a time, and then I was able to get some data about where this new student's literacy skills were at. Go ahead. I'm going to show you the data from a student. I'm not going to play a video and audio of her, so I'll just do the boring way of telling you what happened with her. So she's a native English speaker, but she was reporting, like if Chrysti were her intake person, she was saying, you know, I've felt challenged the whole time. I'm always frustrated. I can't sound words out. So based on her TABE, she was at a grade equivalent of year 2, 3rd month of the year 2. And so the teacher started with that very first list because we go one grade level below. So she started with this list A. I just wanted to give you a very quick view of all of the list side by side, juxtaposed, so you could see how they go to 2-syllable words. There's some compounds in there. And then list C, you're getting into some Latin roots and some prefixes and suffixes, and knowing how do I pronounce that when the vowel sounds are going to change where they get connected. And then list D, even more advanced Latin roots, and understanding how that changes how you get the word off the page. Go ahead. So that student, she took the first list, the teacher, and she got them all right. So then the nice thing is down at the bottom, there's a little cheat sheet. So you don't have to pause and think about the results. So it will tell you if 7 out of 8 correct would be, that's her mastery level. Because she got them all right, then we know she's above grade level 2, so we'll advance to the next one. Yep, just what it says off to the side there. Since she got 10 right, we're going to give her list B words and see if we discover anything there. Go ahead. So here's list B. Can you click it'll fill those in. So she did fine on the first 5. Click the next one. There we go. So Thursday, she said Thursday. Not too uncommon, right? Complete, she missed that blend. Package, she really had to work at it, and she didn't realize that that suffix is going to get that schwa sound. She really did kind of back to the beginning of, oh, it looks like age, so I'm going to say that with that long A. And record, that would be correct, because you could say record or record, either one be correct. And then she wasn't sure what to do with that odd blend there, so you hit the next one. So with this list B, she missed 1, 2, 3, 4 words. So we're going to say her mastery would be grade level 2, because she didn't master this list. Does that make sense? Yeah, 6 of the words correct. So the mastery is grade, the grade equivalent is the higher grade equivalent from the previous list, because she didn't master this list. There are, it's combined. You can see grade equivalent 3, 4, because there are other lists that are separate. But this is a nice efficient list to do, because there's only 4 instead of 8 lists. So this is the quickest little word reading data you can gather. Go ahead. So the word reading test analysis, as it says, alphabetics mastery grade equivalent 1 through 3 indicates, so we've got that number now, mastery level 2. So what do I do with that? It really is a clue about next steps. And it's a clue about, well, how far, remember that Henry's slide, Marcia Henry's slide, where you can see the stages and what they're working on if they're in that stage. So because this reader was at mastery of grade level 2, then we can say, oh, I bet she needs some phonics instruction. How far back do I go? So then you have to dig deeper to find that out. If she had been at that alphabetics mastery grade level 4 through 7, you could say, oh yeah, she needs some phonics, but probably at a higher level, needing some multi-syllable breaking instruction. And then lastly, if she had been higher up, one of those later lists, then we'll start there in our instruction with affixes and roots and things like that. Go ahead, Rob. So because this student was in that grade level 2 mastery, then I'm curious, well, then how far back should I begin, or at what stage should I begin, and what are the specifics? So again, on the Atlas website, you do have access to this assessment tool. Sylvia Greens is on there. Marn Frank has been kind enough and industrious enough to kind of separate the lists a bit so that you don't have to think that you have to give all of the words. Perhaps you give this level 1 list, these, and it's isolated just A and I sounds. And if they're really struggling there, stop. So don't torture them or yourself too much. You've found what you need, start at that level. But you can continue. I like to give several. So you could do this as a reading test. You could also give it as a spelling test. And I prefer to give it as a spelling test myself. Because then I can see what they know well enough that they've got it and they can produce it. If I did it as a word reading list, like I did the first one, then it's easier to read than it is to write. So it's going to help me analyze where their mistakes are when they start spelling the words. So this tool is, like I said, available to you. And then you can start seeing the patterns. Where are they? Do they have the short vowel sounds? Do they have the blends? And so on. You turn to the next one. I don't use Sylvia Green. So this is a little snapshot of the tool I use, but it does the same thing. I have them write. This is the primary level. It's in a series called Words Their Way. So there's primary spelling level. There's also an elementary level. So I often give this one. There's 26 words that I have them write. You can see my habit of I write, when they make a mistake, I write what I see on their paper. So see number 3, I said dig, and they wrote deg. And number 8, I said sled, and they wrote sleed, and so on. So I just liked having it there. So I'm kind of I love to analyze it. That's my jam. So I can see what kinds of I'm sorry, the Words Their Way is not on the Atlas website. So it's pretty complex. And I was trained in this when I got my literacy degree. So I fell back on this one because the tool was familiar to me and I didn't want to learn a new, I didn't want to learn to ride a new bike. So I use this one and I like how I can instantly see, do they have the consonants? Do they have them at the beginning and the end? And yeah, a lot of K-12 people who have that background might be familiar with this. So there's like one book that helps you with the assessments and understanding all of this development, like the Marcia Henry. But then there's some breakout books for each of these levels. You can see the letter name. There's a book for that to help folks along with the short vowel sounds and the digraphs. And then there's a book called Within Word Patterns, where they start learning the long vowel patterns. And there's word sorts for each of these steps and each of these sounds and each of these graphemes, these spellings, and the other vowel sounds. And this is kind of when I see the intermediate students coming in from other, Chrysti, what are you asking? I'm wondering if you could do it via, you must be talking to somebody else. So within word patterns, this is where I see a lot of the people from other countries coming in and needing just some gap filling with some of the long vowel patterns, and especially some of those other vowel patterns that are less common. And so I often begin there and find that that's what they need. And then there's another book on the syllables and affixes. And then when they get up to that elementary level and do a different one for me, then it has all of those Latin roots and prefixes, Latin roots. Okay. Next slide.
Next slide is me, but there are a couple questions. One, if anyone has used Words Their Way, the assessment virtually, so either via Zoom or any other format. And then there was a personal question asking if you use the Words Their Way books by person.
I do use those books, and I was blessed enough about, I don't know, 6 years ago, I had a volunteer and she copied and color coded each of the word sorts from those books, and I use them a lot. Yes. But it's very complex. So I didn't grasp the whole system overnight. It would take, you know, like a college level course. You can do it on your own, but you got to read the book and absorb the book and then understand this progression. And then you can use there's 4 main books at these levels: the letter name, the within word, the syllables, and then later that Latin roots. But they also have a few extra books, like there's one for elementary students who are Spanish speakers. So it's just specially for their vowel sounds, and you know, there's some that are similar and there's some that are different. And so they've got other books out there that I haven't dug into as much, but I do use my word sorts from these 4 breakout books.
All right. We're going to move on, and we know it's unnatural and cruel to make teachers sit and listen for as long as we did. So we'll do another breakout session and give you a chance to share your best practices. As Theresa said, we know that you're all experts. And so we're going to put you into breakout rooms, give you about 8 minutes, and just give you a chance to talk about what your intake process looks like, the questions you asked. Chrysti shared hers, so if you want to share yours. And then we've already gotten to this conversation about various assessment tools, so you can continue having that. So I'll ask the magical Marisa to put us into breakout rooms.
All right, just having to shift a few people here at the last minute so that we don't end up with rooms of 1 person. That would not be pleasant. Nobody to talk to.
But you're the first person in that room, so that's always good.
This is true. All right, here we go, everyone. We'll see you back in about 8.
All right, we'll continue on. Theresa.
All right. Is it me who needs to change my view? I can see your tabs and things.
All right, let me do it here.
I hope you had a good break, and we'll start in a second.
Just go ahead.
Okay. Take a deep breath. We've got about a half an hour left. I must confess, as you know, as I was doing my panic thing last night, that looking at my slides, that I really focused heavily in this next portion on a lot of alphabetics, building alphabetic skills building tools. And I really did leave out a lot of vocabulary and comprehension. So please don't assume that if your students are low level and Teresa only showed alphabetics, that that's all you're going to do in class. So forgive me, but that's what we can do in 2 hours. It seemed like a lot of time, but then when you get down to all the options that we have out there, there were a lot. So I found that I ended up doing a lot of alphabetics because that seems so foundational at this skill level. And when I started in ABE 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and that same year, within the first month, a student with learning disabilities came into my classroom, and I didn't know where to begin. I didn't have any of these ideas. I didn't have any of these tools. And I was really dumbfounded. And I'm like, I'm an English major. How do I do this? I should be able to teach reading, but I don't know how. So that was maybe my second or third kind of impetus, like I need to learn how to do this at the very foundational levels. Like Chrysti, I have a son with a reading disability. And so I've had this passion, well, for 30 years. And I've had other students in my high school classrooms that I didn't discover had reading disabilities because they hid it very well and compensated. They were brilliant and they compensated brilliantly. So just because folks have a reading disability doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. They have tons of skills and oftentimes have to be more clever to compensate the way the world is built. So some of my general tips, do use evidence-based reading instruction, and that's just preaching to the choir here, that use data. When you can find research that shows what works, jump on it. The next one, use your assessments and match what you do, the activities that you do, the planning that you do, match it to what they need. They see that what you've planned was meant especially for them, and that motivates them, and it makes them feel very special. So besides that, it works. It's more effective if what they're being instructed on is actually what they need. Next, take a systematic approach to phonics instruction. So I'll get into the details of that synthetic, analytical, analogy, et cetera, what that means. And so I didn't write it here because there's enough words on the screen already, and I overwhelmed with all my own typing. So to go along with that, I would recommend what gave me comfort when I first started trying to do phonics instruction was to use tools that were already made, because I was looking at, like, where do I start? The S sound, M sound, where do I build? So don't feel bad about using what's already out there. The researchers have figured out what is the progression and done that for you, done that planning for you, and you just jump in where you see your students need you to jump in. Next one, although I'm focusing on alphabetics so much today, and that's like their immediate need and maybe the most, I can't think of the word right now, but it's their most pressing need, but it's not their only need. Vocabulary is so helpful and important. And then do some real reading. You'll hear my two students talking in a little bit. You met Jim and Dave via their photos, but they're going to talk to you in a little bit and tell you what they found helpful. And we kind of laughed about all of the word level drills they did early on. when we got into real reading, that's when they're applying what they learn and they're doing real reading, and that's a heck of a lot more enjoyable. So do spend only a little bit of time doing alphabetics instruction. Maybe if you're seeing them every day, maybe it's 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day. If you're seeing them less often, maybe a little bit longer, but break it up. Definitely don't have a whole class of alphabetics. That would be a brain drain and not very motivating. And then practice, practice, practice. Out of context, individual words, those decoding skills, but then also in a context of fluency. And then teach problem solving skills with phonics. So what I mean is, if they've learned one pattern, oh, here's the magic E in a one syllable word, it's A-G-E, it's age. If it doesn't work in a long word, what other vowel sounds can they try? So if one thing doesn't work, they know what tool to try next. Okay, go ahead, Rob. So part of that, when I say use evidence-based reading instruction, routines work for all people and learners. So have a routine. I use Mega Words books in my classes, and I usually start, so I have my routines of starting with vocabulary, and then we do a little phonics or their alphabetics. And then we apply that in a context and do our reading. But you can do it so many combinations. But the routines help. It really helps students feel comfortable. And then the sequence, and it's intentional, and you're coming back to it over and over again. Multisensory. So the more of those learning modes you can employ, the better it's going to stick. So you're going to use their sight, their hearing. If you can do some manipulating and moving things around, even better. Use their body for writing in the air or on. My grandson, who also has a reading disability, we would do the writing on the back anyway. So lots of kinesthetic ways that you can do it in class. And then the explicit, and in ABE, we've got this down, I think, that we start with modeling. You model, I do, and then we do it together for however long it takes, and then you do. Use that pattern with your teaching. And I think, well, it's popped into my head because it might not come back in. That's a place is a place for differentiation. So let's say that I've got a group of students in an alphabetics group, and they're learning the syllabication rules. So I might be able to teach a mini lesson on where to break a multi-syllable word. But then the next day, I might have my lowest level students with the learning disabilities repeat and do that again, where the group that's native English speakers, but they don't have disabilities, they need to move on, so that for that, however many times the first group is repeating, the other group is doing something else, even though they were all in the same beginning mini lesson with the syllable break practice. Go ahead, Brown. So you saw this on that graphic, on Marcia Henry's graphic, but here it is in more of a list form. So it builds from number one. Phonemic awareness is key, and that's hearing the sound differences. So think about children learning. That's the first thing you do, and they get to do this for 5 years before school. You're playing all kinds of word games and talking and rhyming with them. And I found my students with learning disabilities, now this is just my experience, this is not research, but I found that it begins there. They don't always distinguish the sounds, or they don't process it. So it's neurological, and I can't get in there, but I can just see that I can hear that they don't hear things or process it in the same way that I do. And that seems to then impact when they start associating the sounds with letters. If you don't hear that sound, then making that sound letter connection gets hampered as well. Number 2, that next stage, recognizing different, the upper letters, lowercase letters. You've probably read all of this while I was talking about phonemic awareness, decoding words, so syllable breaks, predictable onset rhyme. So you'll see that in a little bit, so don't worry if that doesn't make sense. Common spelling patterns, and then inflectional endings, and then it continues from there and gets into the upper alphabetics. Go ahead, Ram. Again, I just threw that visual back in so you could see it in more of a linear picture of that progression. And it is very predictable, the stages people develop in. So if you can identify what stage they're in, and start there. Go ahead, Rob. So there's Jim. If I was tech savvy and I had all kinds of time, which I don't, neither one of those skills, I visualized showing you all my 2 students and kind of their history along this continuum. So I don't know. I didn't know these fellows back when they were developing phonemic awareness in their preschool years. And then they've been searching out and finding different tutors and things for the last 30 years. When Jim and Dave were in school, there wasn't the same kind of policy, educational policy, and so they were a lot of times stuck in a room without specialized help and a lot of occupational kinds of classes. So they did a lot of work, and because teachers just weren't sure how to teach them. And so when they got out of high school, they both worked with their hands and did, construction and carpentry work. But they always had a desire to learn to read. It's been on their bucket list for decades. So since their 30s, they've found ABE folks and then, fallen back out or had to go work or what have you. So they've been in and out with different tutors for decades. When I met them in the Jim in 2013 and Dave in 16, they joined me and they had the consonants down pretty well, and the short vowel sounds came and went and was very, very fleeting. So I drilled them on that and we were doing that, but it was torture for all of us and it just didn't stick. So I'll tell you later what worked better for them, because the phonics, that synthetic phonics, didn't work for them. And right now, so I put that picture, you don't have to change back, but that picture of Jim is on the affixes stage because we're just starting to make that transition from the single syllable words into starting to break syllable types. Well, we've been working on breaking syllable types for about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years now, and we're just starting to introduce affixes and suffixes and seeing those chunks. And so this is a huge transition point, and it's very confusing going from breaking by sound to breaking by meaning chunk, and it's big. Okay, next one. So this is, I was going to just launch into all these little learning tools, but I thought you need a break from me talking and reading a screen full of print. I want you to hear what David and Jim say has helped them learn reading better and in their perception. And I didn't give them any prep time. I just turned on my camera's phone and asked them some questions, and here's what they had to say. I'm talking about some of the things we do in class.
Oh boy.
So maybe I could ask you, what have been some of the things we've done together that I'll for sure share that with those teachers that we don't do much together.
Thanks a lot. I'm not going to zoom on you anymore.
But I'm putting you on the spot, but
You are.
yeah.
Well, I think reading different books, I mean, it's something different instead of just class books and stuff like that. This is kind of gets us into different things. We're not to bring up the reading.
Okay, so you've liked, am I hearing you right, that you've liked reading these short
Yeah, I
books
do.
together?
Yeah.
And
I mean, it helps a lot because, I mean, there's a lot of big words in them, and that makes us work them out.
good.
So, yeah, I mean, that's, you know, some of these words are pretty big. I mean, if you're not used to trying to split them up.
Right, so we've gotten some practice in
Yeah, so I mean, even that last book was Amazon.
the rainforest.
That was a nightmare by itself.
Well, I think it's just like what you were going to say. More, I would think. We don't speak Spanish. That's a lot.
Oh,
harder to-
and a lot of those
English
words-
is a lot
Yeah.
easier to break down because we are used to English and we're not used to speaking other
Right,
languages.
we've figured out the vowel patterns for English, yeah.
I
And that
found
book had a
that-
lot of countries
Countries.
and cities from
Yep.
around the world. Names are always hard. Right?
Yes.
I mean, it kind of brings us up a little bit too in chat, you know, on
Yeah, it
everything
doesn't
that,
hurt, you know.
where things are and what happened at whatever it was.
Because I know
Yeah.
English is a little easier for me to break, you know, to break it down a little bit.
Yeah, right. What are some other things we've done in the past in class together that have been the most helpful, do you think?
You want to see the scars you've given me?
Just trying to make it so I won't share it with the teachers.
Well, we do kid around quite a bit. I don't know about the other teachers.
That helps take the edge off.
But I mean, putting, you know, like now I got words that you want to put up to take it and split and talk about
How to split them?
how to split them and then to actually sound them out so that they, when you're reading whatever it is, it makes sense to
Yeah.
do it.
I don't know if this is going to help, but I know if you read stuff on these, especially these pages, a lot of the words flow in together.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the other books we read, it does also.
Yep. So what we're reading about helps give a clue about
Yes.
what
Yeah,
the
what it's
word
gonna-
will be.
Because there is sometimes, well, I'll pick on that baseball one. I said it was baseball, and then you said it was football.
Yeah.
To me, it ran into baseball. That's the reason I put down.
Maybe I should write that down.
See, when I first started with this, we had a lot of cards, but we didn't read much in the books.
Right. We're so focused on just reading single words.
Yeah, I mean, we had a big list of words all the time to.
Well, that did
Work
help
through.
also. Getting
Right.
Yeah.
Reading them, like he said.
It helped to read the
Yeah,
word,
yeah.
but is that what you want to read in life? Is just a bunch of lists of words?
If you think about it, this is all that is.
Yeah.
But I mean, these, you know, for the words we did, you didn't put nothing with them.
Right. They were out of a context,
Yeah,
is
so
what
I
we
mean,
say. They were
yeah,
all
we
by
had all kinds of
themselves.
words, but it wasn't hooked up to another word or another sentence. And this way here, we had, you know, Kennedy. Okay.
Well,
Kennedy,
some of the
and,
words we did through, you know, goes like let's just, I'm going to use this as an
These
example,
sorts, oh,
like
yeah.
cake or whatever, glass. We ran into these stories in some of these
Right,
stories
we
with
run into
glass.
those patterns.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that helped a lot, I think. And then, we always use D's and thous and A's and B's or twos and
Those sight words.
yeah.
What I like about reading these stories, like when we went past the word level and we started reading shorter, like one page, things that I would print from reading for today's adults.
Yeah.
It was just one page. And it was different each time. What I like about reading the book is those long words, we run into them, they're repeated.
Yes.
Like when we were reading the novel and the guy had his business, so we had to remember how to do business over and over again. So I like in the book
in
that
this
it's
here
repeated.
we got a lot of Kennedys.
Right, so
And
that
we got a lot of
hard,
president.
yeah. So some of those hard words, we see them again and again, and that repetition helps us.
What is that word? I'd have to work it out. We have a lot of these too.
Representative.
Very good,
Yeah.
excellent.
Thank you, Jim.
That just amazes me when he gets that word off the page there. And sometimes cat doesn't come off the page, but representative, it came out. It's amazing. So you could, let me hit a few of the things I heard them say is, they really, reading a book was so much better than, back in the day in 2014, 15, when we were reading a lot off the cards. And I want to mention that the materials I used back then, they were, I did some phonics stuff, but the print that I used was printing off, we did story by story with Jim on the early ages. And so that's on the Atlas website. And I had as volunteer working with that. And so that was a lot of sound, but then they were putting sentences together and there was a very short, tiny little bit of reading that they would do and repeat. And then when Jim was able to move to the next level, I did, and David joined about that time, then I started using the reading skills for today's adults, and I would print out a one-page article piece at their level. So we were reading very short things, and it was always disjointed because then the next class period or a week or two later, it was another one off of the reading skills for today's adults, but it served our purposes for some reading and some writing. Oh my gosh, 12 minutes. I better go much faster. So here, since these three evidence-based approaches, use all of them. Sometimes you're going to be combining and sounding things out, putting things together. Sh, and then putting it together. Sometimes you're going to be pulling things apart, analyzing them, and then the analogy. You can see now I'm like, oh, I got to talk fast. Analogy is what worked best for me with these fellows because the analytical, it's really hard, and I'll come back to it. Go ahead. I'll zip through that. So here's a quick glance at, it looks very much like story by story. And this is, you're going to focus on several sounds at a time. You will with adults, they're very distinct sounds. You're going to have maybe a few sight words, and then you could do some building, sentence building with the few words. So that's at this level. Synthetic looks different at higher levels. Go ahead. I will skip that. That's just describing some of that synthetic at that very, very, very beginning level. Analytic phonics. So they're looking at differences. So I have a video that we won't show of these guys sorting these two, the short sound and the long sound. And it's good to do every once in a while, and it's fun. And we did do it, but I wasn't seeing a lot stick with these fellows. We'd encounter them and it helped a bit, but it didn't always stick. It's still worth using to have this forward and backward, pulling things apart and having that experience, but don't stick with one thing like analytic phonics. Do it as part of your practice, but not your full practice. Go ahead. The analogy phonics is what really I saw a lot of progress with these two particular learners. Doing the onsets and rhymes. So the onset would be this is a picture of my board, and you can see some of the consonants. This is me trying to recreate what we used to do. So we have some onsets to the left there, the C, D, F, and then we have the rhyme, or you might hear a word family, might hear it say that way. And then we're putting them together. So not only is it kind of putting this together. So what if I have D and ab and I put them together, I have dab. Well, what if I take away the D and put ab? What do I have? And I saw the fastest progress with this analogy phonics for these two fellows. And this is also, you can find it on the Atlas website under those reading resources. So this is what we did for their phonics. Go ahead. This is analogy phonics kind of at that syllable level, the inflectional endings. So this is a word sort. I like word sorts, and Penny Brown has a sort session right after lunch, and making your own sorts. I like it because it uses all of the senses. You're visualizing. If you do a blind sort, they have to really, that means you're saying the word and they're not seeing it yet, and they're kind of sorting as we go, so that they have to pay attention to sound. There's lots of, like the analogy phonics, we made it kinesthetic as well. So we were putting them together and physically changing it and then having them write it over again. So getting their body involved in it. Go ahead. See how fast I can talk. So in those later levels, as I've said already, so I don't need to put this all out, but we start showing where to break longer words. And let's show this little bit of clip here. This is a mega words we're using, and they're practicing an open syllable, words with an open syllable at the beginning. And we won't play very much of it.
Bacon. Item. Pilot. Total.
Good.
Human.
Good.
Unit.
Got it.
Label.
Good.
Secret.
Good.
Final.
Good.
Item.
Good.
Even.
Good.
Open. Frequent.
Very good. David, read them one more time, and Jim, echo it back to him.
Bacon.
Wait,
Oops.
no, just
Bacon.
go ahead. Sorry, you guys can read them together now, so work them out at the same time.
Bacon.
Total.
Pilot. Title.
Look at that.
Total.
You got it.
Human.
Unit.
Unit.
Label.
Good, you got it, Jim.
What did he say?
Label.
Label.
There you go.
Secret. Final. Title.
Look at that again.
item,
You got it.
even, open, frequent.
Good. Jim, will you read those to us, please?
Boy.
We'll help you pull out of there, Rob.
All right. Bacon,
Mm-hmm.
pilot.
So you might have noticed that I know Jim needs a lot more modeling. So David gets that sooner. So I have David kind of do the modeling, and Jim is kind of echoing right after after David says it. So I build into their drill extra practice for both of them, but a chance for Jim to kind of hang back a little bit and hear it more. And we've had that same list for many class periods, and they don't get bored. It's still a challenge every time. So don't feel like, oh, we've done this already and jump ahead too soon. And I could set that aside, and I have set it aside. We've done other things. And then weeks later, I pulled that same page back out. This is kind of the same thing that they were doing. They were working with open syllables. So this is a picture of that pulling apart and working with closed syllables. And I would love to show you more, but I talk too much. I'm so sorry. So you can see there is a link in this slide. So if you want to get these slides later, there's a link to a YouTube and seeing another teacher, not me, work with this. So it's nice to see other people in action, and I think it gives us some comfort to go ahead. This is also available on the Atlas website. You can go to the next slide. And the next one, I'm not going to read all that. You can read it later. But when we're getting up to the affixes and roots, here's what kind of an assembly approach might look like. So this is also on the Atlas website, and it's called Morpheme Matrices. And it does help with these roots. I don't use this one as much. I have pulled it out with students who are reading at like grade level 5, 6, 7, but it really is a good tool. I'll leave it at that. Go ahead. What else do we have? So you've seen a lot of using of sorts, and I said it already that I like sorts. It's not everything I do, but it's something I do every couple of weeks. Or when I, like, for example, I had a student last week who wasn't hearing and making that association with the past tense endings. How they sound is 3 different ways, but they always look the same. So I used a sort to help make that connection. I like them because they're visual, they're auditory. You're talking, you can do some critical thinking. What do you notice? What are you still curious about? You can use some of that language with sorts, and it's kinesthetic as well. So it's a very effective technique. It's not one of those other things, but it's just a teaching technique. Go ahead. So these are the 2 guys and a little glimpse of their life outside of the classroom. So Jim often will bring in these miniature buildings that he's built, and they're just lovely. And here's Dave on the right. He helped refurbish 3 huge old dormitories in the West Metro area, and veterans now live in there. So he's used some of his tiling skills and his cement skills. And so I just wanted to remind myself that even though sometimes I feel like, oh, I've got to help fix this, that I don't get tricked into having a deficit mindset, that I'm filling some need, because these fellows are whole people and with rich experiences, lots of intelligence, way more than I have. So we all have our gifts and our strengths, and I wanted to remind us of that. Go ahead.
All right. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up. It is 11:14. So thank you very much for your attendance at the training today. Thank you very much to Chrysti and Theresa for sharing their expertise. If you remember something that you should have put on the challenges I have, or things I wish we had PD on, please feel free to email any of us or email the Atlas staff, and we will note that. So again, thank you very much.
Hey, Rob.
Yes.
There was one question in the chat that we could address real quick.
Sure.
What was it?
Jolie, I hope I said your name right. She asked, what is happening with online learners? Assuming that this teaching was all pre-COVID.
Oh, I'll just quickly say that my middle level STAR reading class, we've met online since the pandemic began. So I have scanned the MegaWords books. And so then I pull a MegaWords page, and they have their book in their hand at home. And I have the page that we're working on the screen. And so I can make the marks on the page, and they're doing the same thing at home. And then for vocabulary, we finished the third and final Words Their Way book. And yeah, is that the right title? Words to Learn By? Words Their Way. I flip them when talking too fast. And so we are finished with those. So then on the Atlas website, I found some vocabulary. So I can pull those up in the same way on the screen. And then I sent them a copy so that they could print them out at home. And then we've been using News for You for their comprehension and their fluency practice. So I do fluency first, like we choose a story and they have to practice reading along with the story and then try to do it on their own. So they're practicing fluency with the News for You article, and then we come back and read it together. And I do any comprehension that I want to do with that same News for You article. And now I'm trying to think of how I can do something else, because I'm like, this is not digging very deep for some of my ones that want to do GED prep. So I need to differentiate. So that's where I'm at. And there's a resources page after this, so look at that later. I've linked some of the resources that I mentioned on that resource page after this thank you page. But thank you for joining us. Anything else we want to? There it is. So you can find some of the references on that last slide.
All right, and those slides have been uploaded to the participants folder, which is linked on your flyer. I chatted that out. We'll be starting the next session at 11:30. So you can find the Zoom links for that on that flyer. And thanks so much to our presenters. Thanks so much to our ASL interpreters. We appreciate your work, and have a great rest of the conference, everyone.